We're talking Penn State Nittany Lions football on the Our Lads Football Network, Our Lads Football YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in. And I know we haven't talked a lot about Penn State so far this season, but that's because I've been busy on the Penn State YouTube channel. And I've mentioned this many times, putting together post-game shows all season long. And it's been a lot of fun. Especially covering a team that's going to the playoffs. So I figured this would be the perfect time to have on my guest, who is been my partner most of the season covering these post-game shows. He works for Happy Valley Insider, a part of the Rivals Network. Marty Leap. Marty, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, Greg. Always look forward to it.
Yeah. We normally are talking post-game shows and we go right into it and wrap up games, and I'm on your dime, but now you're on my dime. And so now we're going to get into what Our Lads likes to get into in just a little while. And of course, that's a little bit of not necessarily professional scouting, but I'm going to pick your brain because I know we've talked about these players all season long, but we haven't done it here on Our Lads. So I'm going to try to find out and let the viewers know exactly what we've been talking about and get your opinion on a lot of players that'll be coming out this year in the draft and future drafts. So before we get into that, though, I know one of the main thing that you guys do, of course, over at Rivals is in the recruiting department. We just had a big recruiting day a few days ago. How did that go for Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, Penn State, it was a weird cycle because over the summer there were a couple of key targets that you kind of expect them to land that they missed on, and then they came back in the fall and flipped a few of those guys. And there were a few others that you felt like they were going to flip that just never came to fruition. But they closed strong. Chaz Coleman, a defensive end who might have the highest ceiling of anyone in this class, is someone who is from Ohio, grew up an Ohio State fan, was offered very late by the Buckeyes. As soon as he was offered, originally set up a official visit to Ohio State. And you're like, well, you can see the writing on the wall on this one. And they were able to keep him in the fold, prevent him from ever taking that visit and locked him down. And then Andrew Olish, who actually was after signing day, it was on the Friday of that week that he flipped from Michigan to Penn State, a top 100 in-state tight end who'd been committed to Michigan since the summer. He's one of those guys who I mentioned who for a long time it seemed like would end up a Nittany Lion, commits to Michigan, and then you're able to flip him at the end. So a strong close to the class for the Nittany Lions. Currently Rivals, we have it sitting as the 16th best class in the country. And it may not be done yet because they still remain pretty hot and heavily in on top 100 quarterback Bryce Baker, who's been committed to North Carolina for quite a while. But when Mac Brown was fired, took an official visit to Penn State, and now the family was waiting to see how the coaching search at UNC was going to shake out. So I mean, obviously, a lot of it's going to hinge on conversations the family has with Bill Belichick, which is still just insane to think that Bill Belichick is the coach of North Carolina, and how that goes before they make a final decision. So you could be adding a top 100 quarterback to the class as well. But yeah, they finished strong with being able to hang on to Coleman and fight off the Buckeyes and be able to flip Olish. And, there's some really strong position groups in this class. I think the offensive line class is really good. I think the secondary class is phenomenal. And as Penn State fans will be happy to hear, I think the wide receiver class is also pretty strong. So Matthew Otten is a guy who I think can make an impact early. He's probably the most underrated guy in this class. We have him as a lower rated 3-star Rivals, and I think that's one that we definitely have wrong. Explosive playmaker that wide receiver room sorely misses. And like I said, he's an early enrollee. I think he can make an impact early. And he was another one of those guys I mentioned earlier. He originally committed to Virginia Tech, and then Penn State flipped him in September. So, yeah, I think this is a really good recruiting class, all things considered. You may not have some of those, like, elite top-end guys that you look for outside of maybe, like, an Olish and probably defensive back Darius Dixon, who is also a crazy win for the staff from Mater Dei in California. For Penn State to get a California kid, period, let alone a Mater Dei kid who is – a legitimate top 150 kind of recruit is pretty insane. But you look what Penn State's done at cornerback the last few years, and it kind of adds up. So, yeah, good class. Not the strongest class ever for them under James Franklin or anything of the sort. And again, if you add Bryce Baker to this, which seems very possible, then it really changes the perception of the class too, because you had an elite quarterback to it. But yeah, all in all, good class. And they did a good job, like I said, finishing strong, of fighting off the Buckeyes for Coleman and then flipping Olish from Michigan. And, when you flip Olish from Michigan, it's kind of like a win-win, right? Because not only do you land the top 100 tight end recruit, you keep him away from another school you expect to compete with for Big Ten national championship. So,
absolutely.
All in all, a solid class for Penn State. And, I think what the staff, I think, is most excited about was some of these recruiting wins, winning Olish, keeping Coleman, landing Dixon from all the way out in California. Offensive line, wide receiver, always use offensive linemen, right? And wide receiver is the biggest need on this roster. And I think they really killed it at both those positions.
All right. So those are the players of the future. What we're going to do now is talk about the players of the present as we pop in the R-Lads depth chart for Penn State. And then, of course, this is going to have a lot to do with our next topic, which is the game coming up next week against SMU. But let's talk about some of these players. Let's start at quarterback. So Drew Aller is anytime, you have a quarterback with the talent like Aller, then that's going to be a big topic around the draft. My first question to you is gut feeling, will Drew be back at Penn State for 2025? Or do you think it matters what happens in the playoffs?
I do think it matters. I really do. I think if Drew had to make a decision right here today before the playoffs start, I think he'd be back. But what happens in the postseason, what happens on the national stage matters. I think a good example is Penn State. You look at Chris Godwin, who may have gone pro anyway, but then he just absolutely torched USC in that phenomenal Rose Bowl game back in 2017, made his decision easy, and the guy's going on to have a heck of a career, make a lot of money in the NFL. So I do think it matters for Drew. I think if it's twofold. I think one, if you come out, if you're Drew Aller and you light it up in the playoffs and you lead this team on a run, I think on a personal level, maybe it's easier to go pro because you feel like, hey, you know what, we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. But on a professional level, it definitely becomes easier because if you can go out and in the college football playoff, you're putting up big numbers, you're torching teams, that's going to resonate with scouts, with NFL front offices. So, like I said, I think if Drew had to make the decision today, I think he'd be back. And I think part of that is he'd have a legitimate shot to be QB1 next year, potentially be 1-1 in the draft. But I do think a lot of it will hinge on the playoffs. Let's say he comes out and he just absolutely balls out. And even let's say, hey, they get to the semis or something and they lose. I think there's a good shot he goes then because it's going to increase his draft stock. But I do think a lot will hinge on how these next 1 to 4 games go for Penn State.
Okay. What is and I know the answer to this, but if there is just one facet of his game that he really needs to improve upon, and if he comes back, that's the thing he's going to try to improve upon the most. What is that?
I think for him, I mean, he's made a lot of improvements this year in a lot of areas he needed to, but I still think, and this is most quarterbacks, but when he's under pressure, when the pocket starts to break down, and he has been night and day with that this year compared to last year, mainly because he hasn't been afraid to use his legs. And I'm not even saying tuck the ball and running. I'm saying moving around in the pocket, keep play alive. But I think he needs to get a little bit better at that, of when the play breaks down, keeping your eyes downfield, looking for those receivers. Because, I mean, Greg, a lot of times those are those plays where that guy winds up wide open 20 yards downfield because the quarterback steps up and the play starts falling apart. So a safety walks up, and if the wide receiver keeps going, he's sneaking behind, and those are those 30, 40-yard chunk plays. I think that's his biggest area of improvement. I think a lot of the other areas you wanted to see improvement this year, his footwork has been much, much better, which is a big one. He's done a better job going through his progressions as well. Yep. Now, I still think the progressions could use some work, but I also think that is one that somewhat you wonder, not to knock Penn State's receiver room, but anybody who's watched them knows it's not a great group. And how often does he know the odds of anyone not named Tyler Warren or maybe Trey Wallace being open are pretty slim. So that hurts him in going through the progressions. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just when the pocket collapses, when there's pressure on him, handling those situations better while also more consistently going through his progressions. I think if he can improve those two areas, the sky is truly the limit for him. Because when it comes to arm talent, there are a few quarterbacks, not just in college football, there may be a few quarterbacks in the NFL who have the pure just arm talent and God-given ability that Drew Aller has.
He kind of it reminds me of not just his game, a little bit of his game, a little bit of his size, but also of his lack of production if he comes out, and that's of Sam Darnold. Is a big guy, strong arm, not a lot of experience, that will get drafted high, and that, unfortunately for Sam, he was thrown right into the wolves. And we've talked about this.
Yep.
As a Jet fan, I would like nothing more than, if you want to let Aaron Rodgers come back another year, whoever the coach is, fine. That might even be perfect. Draft this kid, stash him for a year, let him learn from Aaron, and then let him play maybe next year, if not in 2 years. And I know they want to rush him because of contracts, but you just can't. Mm-hmm. Don't rush the kid. And I think he's going to be a really good player at the next level if he's not rushed.
Yeah, and I like that comparison. If that is how it shakes out, as the Minnesota Vikings fan of the tandem here, I hope wherever he goes, they get Minnesota Vikings Sam Darnold. Not Sam Darnold out of them.
Yeah.
But no, and I do think too that's part of where the incentive, the intrigue, whatever it is for Drew to come back for another year is, because I think anymore in the NFL, a lot of teams, and a lot of it is because the new model in the NFL is, hey, try and win when you've got that quarterback on the rookie deal.
Yes.
You have so much cap space, right? I think because of that, a lot of NFL teams aren't interested in these developmental guys anymore.
No.
They would have been in the past where, hey, like when the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers, we've got no problems letting him sit for 2 years behind Brett Favre, and then we hand him the reins. I don't think teams don't do that anymore because of the way the salary cap and things like that are structured. So that's where I think that adds some incentive to Drew to come back next year, because if you can come back for that 4th year, get 4 years on campus, 3 years as a starter in the Big Ten, and especially you've already seen him take a leap from year 2 to year 3. Yep. He can make another jump 3 to 4. Like I said, I think he legitimately could play his way into 1-1 next year. Because, this year's quarterback class I know isn't great. Next year's might be even worse. So I think that's on the other side of it, that's some of the incentive for Drew to come out this year, because this isn't a good quarterback class. Shador is the only one that I can confidently say I think is going to work out in the NFL. So I think that's incentive there too, where his odds going in the first round this year increase because of that. But I think if he comes back for another year, like I said, he's got a shot to really play himself into 1-1 discussion. It's a tough decision for him to make. But yeah, we'll see what happens. And I like the Darnold comp though, because there's a lot of similarities. As someone who has watched a lot of Sam Darnold this year and a lot of Drew Aller the last 2 years, there's definitely some similarities there.
All right, running back. And we talked about this, as I mentioned to you a few weeks back, about the lack of stats for the running back room. But I think it's important that we talked about that, and we talk about it here with Singleton and Kaytron Allen, because, you can look at a player like Genty and you look at his stats and you look all across college football. There's a lot of quality running backs. And I think now that the game is slowly going back to the running backs and the running game, that these guys, you see them, it's going to be a real good class. A lot of, over 1,000 yards, 1,200, 14. Look at Genty. But that's not the case with these guys. But that's just not the style. And then if you're regarding the fact that they're sharing the load, you're blowing out teams, so you're not going to overextend guys. Mm-hmm. So I think that's interesting. If anybody gets too fixated at the stats with both of these kids, but these are two of the top running backs that you're going to get if they both decide to come out. And again, I'm pretty sure Singleton's coming out, but do you think also Allen's coming out? And let's just say they both come out. How do you differentiate the two? Meaning, what type of team, what kind of style do you think that scheme will be looking for in one of these running backs?
Well, I think Nicholas Singleton, he's definitely your home run hitter. He's battled injuries this year. He did not play against UCLA and then proceeded to play hurt really up until probably the Washington game. Despite that, he's still averaging 6.5 yards a carry this year. He's still averaging almost 10 yards a catch. He's an explosive guy. When he's healthy, there are a few backs in the country quite as explosive as Nicholas Singleton. Not that Kaytron isn't, because Kaytron's definitely got some explosion to him. His jump cuts, he just does such a good job of, if there's a defender in the hole, making him miss, hitting that hole and going. But he's definitely more of your typical kind of like ground and pound kind of guy. And like you said, you mentioned the overall stats aren't there. And part of it's because that's the way Penn State does it. They've always been a multiple back team under James Franklin. Saquon Barkley, totally different, obviously, was a workhorse, but you're talking about a generational talent at running back. Miles Sanders, 1 year as a starter, he was pretty much a workhorse. But even Sanders' year, they started to mix some young guys in. And ever since then, it's always been, Journey Brown and Noah Kane. And then there was a few years with Ricky Slade in there. And now you've got Singleton and Allen the last 3 years. And before that, Kayvon Lee was mixed in. And I think that's part of what makes Penn State an attractive destination of running backs is they do a good job of doing that. So it's not like some of these backs, like look at Ollie Gordon, for example. He's going to get to the NFL. And how much treads he got left on the tires at this point?
Sure.
Especially with the way running back contracts work in the NFL. So, yeah, I think both are going to have very good, very long NFL careers. I think they're going to be very different. I think Singleton's going to be that explosive guy you're going to see on SportsCenter with the 99-yard kick return, or, he gets the off tackle and just runs past the defense. Well, Allen's going to be that guy where it's never really going to feel like it. But you're going to look up the end of the game and he's got 18 carries. He's averaging 5.5 yards a carry. He's probably got you a touchdown, converted a couple important third and shorts. So I think they're both very good running backs who both can be successful in the NFL, but are both very different backs.
Who's better as a let's just go through a quick checklist. Who is better in pass protection?
Pass protection, I would take Katron Allen.
Okay. Who is a better receiver?
Receiver, it's Singleton.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's what's weird because you typically your traditional third down back you think would be both.
Both, yeah.
Singleton's he's a much more natural receiver. Let's put it that way. Allen fights the ball a lot when he catches it. Singleton's much more natural.
All right. Do you think Allen will be back?
I don't. I think Katron Allen is either going to go pro, or if he doesn't go pro, I think he portals elsewhere for his last year of eligibility.
Why is that?
I think a lot of it being the NIL landscape of today's college football and just running backs in general. I think Katron Allen, I know, is compensated pretty well at Penn State.
Yeah.
But I think he's going to want to go. If he doesn't go pro, personally, I think he's going to go pro.
Okay.
If he doesn't, I'm saying I think he'll transfer elsewhere where he can be like the guy.
Got it.
You know what I mean? But I honestly, I think he'll go pro because I think he realizes his style of play also. It's not like Nicholas Singleton where whenever Singleton goes pro, he's going to be one of the first probably 2, 3, 4 backs off the board because of his explosiveness and his playmaking ability. Where, like I said, Katron's that guy that just you look up and he's solid. It's like that starting pitcher in baseball where you never feel comfortable. And at the end of the year, the guy's got like a 3.75 ERA and won you 13 or 14 games. Like that's Katron Allen. So I think Allen goes pro, but if he doesn't, I think he winds up portaling elsewhere for his last year.
Okay. All right. Tight end. And Dave Syverson, our lead scout, said that, well, he actually broke down Tyler before the season began. And it's funny how we're getting the comments. And of course, I manage the channel, so I'm getting these comments like every other day about, oh, what a great job, breaking this guy down or seeing the potential in Warren before the season began. But that's what we do here at Our Lads. But the fact is that Tyler Warren is speaking of generational talents. Tyler Warren is a difference maker at a position that is going to be stocked in this year's draft, even at the top. Tyler is definitely number one, but it's not like it's Tyler and then a gap. There are going to be a few other guys that are going to be nipping at his toes. They're not going to catch him, but it'll be interesting to see how high he goes. I think he's going to be a top 10 pick, but we'll find out exactly how things go during the All-Star process. Tell us first of all, what separates him from the other. This is Penn State, so you've seen a lot of good tight ends here. Mm-hmm. So what separates Tyler from some of the other great Penn State tight ends, and what does he still need to work on?
I think what separates him is he truly is such a complete player. Penn State has been on an incredible run at tight end, dating back to Jesse James and James Franklin's first year. Every starting tight end since 2014 has gone on to be a multi-year starter in the NFL. It's unreal. But you think of Mike Gesicki and look at his NFL career. He can't block, but you put him in the slot and just good luck to a defense, right? Pat Freiermuth was similar. Freiermuth was a better blocker, but ultimately it was the passing that was a true weapon there. Brenton Strange was a phenomenal blocker, but wasn't the most explosive guy in the world with the ball in his hands. Warren is both. He is a great blocker. when he gets the ball in his hands, he's explosive. He does a tremendous job of getting separation, of finding gaps in the defense, getting open. I mean, if you've watched Penn State at all this year, you've seen him do it all. He's a quarterback. He's a running back. He's a blocker. He snaps the ball and proceeds to catch a touchdown on the play. I've said it before. I think he's a guy who it screams Mike Shanahan, and just Shanahan just drooling over what he can do with him. Mike Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay, one of those offensive type of guys, Andy Reid, who just can get so creative. I'm with you. I think he's the best tight end in the class and definitely goes, upper half of the first round. But for what he needs to work on, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm sure his blocking, because most tight ends, your blocking can always improve, because when you get to the NFL and every play, the guy you're trying to block is just bigger, faster, stronger than you probably are as a tight end, I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains there. But ultimately, that's really the only thing I can think of. He does a great job getting separation. He goes up, uses his hands to catch the ball. When he gets the ball in his hands, he's explosive. He's a violent runner who will run you over when he needs to be. He's an insane athlete. We've seen him on those, where he lines up in the wildcat from the 3-yard line, just jumps over the line of scrimmage into the end zone. There's nothing the guy can't do. And I feel like at Penn State, you keep saying, oh, man, this is the best tight end yet under James, and the next guy somehow winds up being as equal to or better. Well, I think there's some really freaking good tight ends coming behind him yet. I think this will prove to be the ceiling. I don't think we're ever going to see another Tyler Warren anywhere in college football, but especially, to have a guy who can do what he does, But yeah, he's just – and the thing is, too, he's such a great kid. He's extremely humble. He's the first guy in, last guy out kind of mentality when it comes to watching film and in the weight room. And, I think part of that is he started out when he was in high school, he was a lowly rated 3-star quarterback.
Wow.
So I think he's kind of always had a little bit of that chip on his shoulder. He's a guy who doesn't have social media. Like he just football's his life. And I think that's a big part of it that helps him stay humble, helps him keep working. And I had never seen this until recently, but if you get a chance, go look it up. I was totally unaware that in 2015 he pitched in a Little League World Series. You want to watch a guy make some hitters look foolish from the left side? I think if football wouldn't have panned out for him, he was going to be okay regardless athletically. But yeah, the kid he's a great kid. He works hard. He does everything at an extremely high level. Absolutely one of my favorite players I've ever seen come through Penn State.
Do you have any idea what would your guess be that he's going to run? Because when I compared myself, Bowers, to Kelsey, say, Bowers was 4.5. I believe Kelsey was 4.6. But of course, Bowers is, you take a look at what he's done, and everybody knows the difference, or the you could say what you want, maybe about, obviously, I think he's about 10 years younger, around that. And I guess every generation you're going to get the talent. It's just going to get more freakish at the position. And Bowers is definitely that. And also what's unique is the fact that Warren is similar height, but he's also, and taller actually, I believe, but he's also a little bit heavier. So if he can run anywhere close to 4.5, 4.6, that's going to be outstanding. What do you think he's going to end up running?
I would guess probably somewhere in the 4.6s. I know I tried to look it up real quick because I knew I had it on here. When he got to campus, which, I mean, this was 4 or 5 years ago now. When he first got to campus, he was clocked at 4.75. So you've got to imagine with just his time with the strength crew and all that, he's probably shaved at least a second off of that. Most guys think that's usually the par for the course, unless you come in some elite burner already running like a 4.4, 4.3. Usually at Penn State, they'll get you to shave second and a tenth or so off your 40. So I'm going to guess he's probably mid 4.6s. Maybe on the right day with the right gun, he gets it low 4.6s. But with everything else he does, with his size and everything, like you said, if you can get that down in the 4.65 or below,
that's incredible.
That's only going to improve your already sky high draft stock.
Yeah, because Bowers was 6'3", 243. Kelsey was 6'5", 250. And again, Kelsey was a 4.61. Bowers was a 4.50. So if Warren can, even if he's like 4.55, that would be outstanding with his size compared to those other two great tight ends. Okay, wide receiver. Now, as you mentioned, there's not a lot here for Drew, and therefore same for the NFL draft. But whether or not any of these kids get drafted, it'll be interesting to see if they wind up having a professional career. So tell me about the players here in this group that will be more than likely entering the draft this year, and who could latch on to an NFL team.
Well, other than this crew, the only one who's out of eligibility is Julian Fleming, the former 5-star recruit, started his career at Ohio State, transferred to Penn State this year. Again, Julian's one of those guys, a great kid. He has done so much behind the scenes for Penn State this year in that wide receiver room, just completely overhauling the culture, the work ethic, the attitude. And you've seen that this year. I don't think it's a coincidence that this year where you had him in there with his, willingness and ability to block, that you've seen the explosive running game return when you didn't have it last year when the receivers weren't very interested in blocking downfield. And all of a sudden you get Fleming in there leading it. And, a lot of times those long runs are because someone gets that last block on the final layer of the defense there to spring you. So, Penn State's not in the college football playoff without him. I know the numbers aren't what people wanted, but that last drive against USC when they tied it in regulation, twice on that drive, he came up big on 4th down with contested catches that they had to have. I hope Julian sticks somewhere in the NFL, maybe get a shot in the practice squad or in training camp somewhere. I'm not sure that happens. The rest of these guys, I don't think any of them are going pro this year. That's for sure. And I think Trey Wallace is a guy who can play in the NFL.
Yeah.
But we've got to see it. You've got to see more consistency. You've got to see him stay healthy. I think if he's back next year, I don't think he goes pro. Maybe he transfers somewhere else, trying for a fresh start. But I think if Trey next year is back, or if he's elsewhere looking for a fresh start and puts up numbers, because he's an athletic freak. The testing numbers are there. He's someone who can jump out of the gym. His basketball highlights in high school were insane. He's a guy who's got the tools. So I think that Trey Wallace can be an NFL receiver. And then Omari Evans, I know he's a guy you and I have talked about a lot on the postgame show throughout the year. Elite speed, fastest guy on the team. He's only a junior, and the tape and the production isn't there to go pro, so he'll be back. But he's a guy who, next April, even if he doesn't get drafted, someone's going to pick him up as an undrafted free agent, because when you see, 3 speed at receiver, you're going to take your chances, because even if you can't get him and worked in as a receiver, that's a special teams weapon, if nothing else. So Omari Evans is a guy who I think definitely winds up on an NFL roster one day just because of his speed.
Yep.
Even again, if it's a special teams gunner, but yeah, that wide receiver room is still one. The potential that's there, I think there's some good NFL potential there, but it's all guys, your Tyser Denmarks, your Peter Gonzalez's, your true freshmen, along with some guys who are coming in. So we're ways away from it yet.
Offensive line. Give me same question, basically. Who do you think is coming out, if anybody, that will be warranted a look-see? And is it pretty? Is Wormley the guy out of that group?
Yeah, Wormley's out of eligibility, so he's got to go. I think Wormley's a guy, he gets drafted probably mid to late rounds and just, kind of hangs around quietly, has a solid NFL career. That's the way he's been his entire college career. Just quietly hangs around every year, winds up like third team all conference. He's been a 3-year starter. The only year he didn't start outside of his redshirt year, he missed due to injury. So he'll be a solid guy. Nick Dawkins, I know that's one that the staff would love to have him back for one more year. He still has his COVID year of eligibility left he could use, even though he's a redshirt senior. So we'll see what happens there. I think personally, Dawkins will come back, because I think he's a guy who probably doesn't quite have the attributes size-wise physically to make it in the NFL. But, come back to college, play one more year, get one more solid NIL paycheck. And you never know. He's Chocolate Thunder's son, so there's definitely some good genes there athletically. And then, I know I've raved about him a lot this year. Anthony Donka, I think, is their best offensive lineman. He's only a redshirt freshman, though. He's got some time to go. But one guy to watch will be Drew Shelton, the true junior at left tackle. He was phenomenal as a true freshman, and when he was thrown to the fire in 2022, really struggled last year, but then he had off-season surgery. So you wonder how much of it was him trying to play through, I believe it was a shoulder, if I remember correctly, which an offensive line obviously is very problematic. And he's had a great bounce back year this year. He started a little slow. Once he got that rust knocked off about the time they got into conference play, he has been really, really good at left tackle. I think he comes back, because I think if he comes back, he could play himself into like a top 100, 150 kind of pick. But I wouldn't be shocked to see him go pro this year. But I do think he'll be back, and I think he's a guy who has a pretty high ceiling in the NFL as well.
And you said he was injured last year?
Yes, he wound up all year he really struggled, and you're like, man, this is not what you expected because he was awesome as a true freshman. For true freshman standards, he was awesome. And then literally like a week after the season ended, he had shoulder surgery, and it's like, well, that makes sense then.
All right. Yes. Okay. Now let's go to the defensive side of the ball, and of course you've got look at the one player in unique color, which definitely accentuates the fact that he's the man, and that's Abdul Carter. So Abdul Carter, you've seen some good. You've seen a lot of good defensive players up front, pass rushers and the like for Penn State. Tell me how Abdul compares.
He's a freak, man. I mean, he's earned 11. If you play defense at Penn State and you wear number 11, you're not giving it. Ever since LeVar Arrington wore it, it has become a earned thing. I think there's only been, including Abdul, maybe 5 or 6 guys who've worn 11 on defense since LeVar, and that was going on 30 years ago now. That's a royal number at Penn State, and he's earned it. He is so explosive. He is so good with his hands, which people overlook how important that is when playing defensive line. He's violent. He can run through you. He'll run around you. He'll spin move. He'll swim. He'll rip. He's got so many ways to beat an offensive lineman. And what makes Carter so good, and he's not as good as Micah Parsons because a few guys are, but similar to Micah where he can rush off the edge. He can line up a middle linebacker and blow up the interior of your line. He could drop back in coverage and run with a running back or a tight end. He is an absolute athletic freak. I don't think it happens, but if he dominates the combine like I'm anticipating and say like Jacksonville has got Trevor Lawrence picks number 1, I don't think it's impossible he goes number 1 overall. I think he's going to be, if not a top 5, definitely slam dunk top 10 pick. And like I said, I think if the first pick is a team like Jacksonville who doesn't need a quarterback and they hold on to that pick instead of trading it, I don't think it's impossible for him to go first.
All right. Go ahead and talk about some of the lesser known players up front, but players that you think might be coming out this year and might latch on.
I'll start with Devon J. Thomas. He's a 6-year senior. Just been a really freaking solid defensive tackle for Penn State. He's been so underrated the last few years, so good against the run, sneaky good against the pass. Like, he's not a great pass rusher, but he's good enough that you don't have to take him off the field on 3rd and long. I think he's a guy who he'll get drafted. I do think, 5th, 6th round, somewhere in there, latch on with an NFL team and just be one of those rotational defensive linemen, gives you 15 to 20 quality snaps a game in the NFL. The 2 other real marquee guys, though, to watch are Denai Dennis-Sutton and Zane Durant. Both are juniors. Both would 100% get drafted if they go. Both, similar to Drew Aller, have a lot to gain by coming back for 1 more year. I think if Durant was 2 inches taller, they have him listed, I think it's 6'1", and that's probably a little generous. I think if he was 2 inches taller, he would be just slam dunk, 1st round pick in the discussion for best defensive tackle in the country because he is so explosive. He's your typical defensive tackle where the stats don't do it justice, because if you watch Penn State games, there are a lot of tackles for losses and no gains and plays getting blown up at quarterback, running for his life and throwing the ball in the dirt that happen because of what Zane Durant's doing. And then for Dennis Sutton, he got off to a tremendous start this year. I think if he doesn't get hurt against Wisconsin, him going pro is probably a sign still delivered. But then he came back from the injury, was a little slow, and then against Maryland, and then especially against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, he really looked to have that burst back. And he's not – I think a lot of people got a wrong impression of Denai Dennis-Sutton because he was a 5-star recruit, and it was well warranted. When you see 5-star defensive ends, you think, you think Abdul Carter, right? You're going to get me 10 sacks and 15 TFLs. Denai Dennis-Sutton, I think, in a 3-4 defense in the NFL is going to be a really good end in that, where he's so good against the run. You can't run at him like you can a lot of defensive ends, but he's good enough. He's not a great pass rusher, but he's good enough to wreak havoc there. I think I would guess Penn State probably manages to get one of those 2 to come back, if not both. But I think they're both guys who are going to have really good NFL careers. But if they come back to college for 1 more year, put themselves in position to make a lot more money in the draft next year.
Okay, next up, the linebacker room. And it doesn't, again, Penn State, traditional linebackers. We can go through the list. We don't have that much time. So we know how good they are. None of those types of players are on this team, but give me the best of the group and whether or not you think any of these players can start in the NFL.
The best this year's been Kobe King, Kalen King's twin brother. He's really been an anchor for that defense. I think he's a guy who can play in the NFL. I don't know if he's a consistent starter, but he's definitely good enough to make it. And then Tony Rojas has the highest ceiling of the group, the true sophomore. He's been very hit or miss this year. A lot of sloppiness, a lot of misplays. But, well, I mean, obviously nothing's been confirmed because of the way James handled things. It's pretty widely known in Penn State circles he's been playing with hurt all year.
Okay.
So I'll be very curious next year. He's a former 5-star guy who flashed as a true freshman. You get him an offseason to recover and get healthy. I'm very curious to see what he looks like next year, healthy again.
Okay. And then the defensive backfield to wrap it up. And first of all, let's talk about Winston because he declared, correct?
Correct. He officially declared earlier today.
Okay. Talk a little bit about Winston, though, because we didn't get a chance to see him this year.
Yeah, I think Winston was well on his way to being a first-round pick had he not gotten hurt. No film this year is going to hurt him. I saw they never did say what it was. They kept saying lower body injury. I did see Adam Schefter said today it was a partially torn ACL or MCL. I forget which one. But his camp expects him to be ready to go for pro day and for the combine, which he'll need because of not having film from this year. But he's so good back there. He can play in coverage. He's physical, can play in run support, high football IQ, explosive, very good player. I don't think he's a first-round pick because of missing the season, but I think I could see him being a guy who gets selected in like the 3rd or 4th round in some team, 3-4 years from now. He's the steal of their draft class. No doubt about that.
What's his, what makes him a special athlete? What is it?
He has a very, very good explosive first step going towards the ball. Once he reads the play and finds it, he flips his hips very well. He's very fluid, moves very well, and has great speed. So, when he's back there at safety diagnosing a play, there was a play against West Virginia this year where the Mountaineers, it was like a 4th and 1, 4th and 2, something like that. And he was shot out of a cannon from his free safety spot, flies up, punches the ball out. The running back had got the first down. He punched the ball out, and that's what caused the turnover and downs. He is so quick and so explosive and reads plays extremely well.
All right, Jalen Reed with Winston out. Jalen Reed is really taking center stage as the main dude in that secondary. I'm not sure where people looked at him before this year, but I just have a feeling that he's moved up a round or two since the beginning of the season.
Yeah, to stick with Penn State comparisons, Jalen Reed to me a lot of similarities to Adrian Amos, who had a really good NFL career between Green Bay and Chicago. Was used very similarly at Penn State to how Jalen Reed's been used, where you can blitz him, you can put him on a line of scrimmage against the run. He's good enough in coverage, not great in coverage, but good enough. Can be a ball hawk at times. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there might not be any player on Penn State's defense who's raised their draft stock more this year than Jalen Reed. He's one of those guys that probably goes in the middle rounds. And then again, like Amos, you just look up 7-8 years later and like, hey, this guy's really quietly putting together a really nice career.
Is it just the two of them, Winston or Reed, or is there someone else that might come out this year that we need to keep an eye on?
I would expect Jalen Kimber. He has another year of eligibility, the transfer from Florida, but I think he's going to go pro. He really struggled last year at Florida, has had a great bounce back here at Penn State. So for that reason, I would expect him to go pro and put together a really, probably a just solid NFL career.
Okay. Let's now wrap up, and we're going to talk about the game. It's next week, and I know we have a little bit of time, but you've had some opportunity, of course. You'll have more of an opportunity by next week, but you've had a little bit of opportunity, I would think, to diagnose what's going on with this SMU team, especially if you've watched the championship game, which was really crazy, especially the ending. But SMU's in. How surprised were you? Because I was really surprised. I know some people were. But I was really surprised that they chose SMU for this one particular reason, because instead of getting Alabama at Penn State in a Saturday night whiteout, it's SMU at Penn State at 12 o'clock on Saturday. And that took a lot of guts, because that's exactly what would have happened. There was no way Penn State, Alabama was playing at 12 o'clock on Saturday. So I give them that. But what have you seen with SMU that leads you to believe that maybe they're going to be a pretty tough team to take care of?
Yeah, I'm with you. I was surprised that they got the nod over Alabama. That was definitely part of the reason. But yeah, they're a good team. I mean, Kevin Jennings is a very good quarterback. Obviously, they have a nice running back there. They're a good football team. I think Alabama is the better football team, but you gotta, I know we've discussed this, the best versus most deserving. They're definitely more deserving than Alabama. which I think got them in. So it's not going to be an easy out for Penn State. I think right now Penn State's listed, we're a week out, is 9-point favorites, which I think with the game being at Beaver Stadium is probably about right. About a 9-point favorite at home against SMU, especially SMU having to come up from Dallas. And just God only knows how horrific the weather is going to be next Saturday in State College. Nothing else. I'm sure it's going to be extremely cold. The staff's already called for a whiteout. So yeah, I think they're going to present a challenge. I think Penn State's definitely the better team. Like I said, I think at home a 9-point spread's right. But yeah, they're going to be a challenge. It's not an easy out. It's not a just get off the bus, show up and win kind of game. They got to come out and play well if they're going to do it.
Is there anything that at this point in time that you think Penn State fans should be concerned with specifically? And then also let our viewers know when you're going to have some additional content prior to the game, because like I said, we still have over a week and a half away. So I'm sure you're gonna dive into a lot more into this game before we even get to it.
Yeah, we're going to have you covered up and down a Happy Valley Insider, obviously. One of the biggest games, in recent program history for Penn State. One probably could argue that this might be the biggest game they've played in. Boy, I don't even know how long. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourself because the first round of the playoff, it's the first time in program history they're in the college football playoff. The game's in Happy Valley. That stadium's going to be rocking. This is a great opportunity for them, and we'll have you covered on the site, on the media aspect of it with our podcast, our YouTube channel, all that stuff. So yeah, it's going to be a very exciting week in Penn State football circles leading up to 12 o'clock next Saturday.
And have you had a chance yet to watch much SMU football?
I watched a little bit. I watched I watched a lot of the ACC title game because I had it's on at the same time as Penn State Oregon, but I had it on the secondary TV. You can see back there behind me. I had it on that screen, so I was kind of keeping tabs on it. I've caught them bits and pieces throughout the rest of the year. Yeah, I think they're a good team. I think that, especially in the ACC, they're a solid team. And I think you've got to kind of put that in context, because not a knock on SMU or anything, but I've watched a few times this year where, you go back to the first game of the year against Nevada, and they were lucky to escape. But they're playing their best football at the right time, which is always something to watch. Right. Outside of that Clemson game, they'd won, 8 or 9 in a row. Yeah,
they had a Duke hiccup because they were very fortunate.
Most of them pretty convincingly outside of that Duke. And Duke wound up a 9-3 team. I think that's a pretty solid football team. Again, I think they're a very good team. I think they're deserving of being in the college football playoff. And I think Penn State is a 9-point favorite with the game in Happy Valley is probably about right. So
I like them. I like Penn State. I think it's a nice number to take Penn State.
Wins. I think if I had to guess, probably like a 10-point victory. But SMU is not going to make it easy. This isn't Maryland. This isn't, one of those schools where you just got to show up and you're going to win. They're going to fight you tooth and nail. And you're in a college football playoff. If you made it this far, you're not facing a bad team.
And it's also going to be one of those things where all these teams that are home, they are going to have to deal with a little bit of pressure because they're going to be heavy favorites. It's something new. We have never dealt with these situations before. We've had playoffs, but we've never had home playoffs. So there's a lot of unknowns going into it. But it is the second game. We will see Notre Dame the night before, and Notre Dame will not be Penn State's opponent until the semifinals. Hopefully, of course, Penn State gets there, but it would be at Boise State, and it actually worked out just the way we kind of thought it could if Penn State got the best possible seeding situation, and really they did. They get SMU the first game, Boise on the road in the second one. Now they just have to take advantage of it.
Yeah, we talked about that after the Big Ten championship game, how, losing that game may put you in a more advantageous place seeding-wise, and that's what we've seen. So, you mentioned Boise. I understand that this probably means nothing, but sometimes these stats in sports, there's something to them. It being the Fiesta Bowl, Penn State has never lost in the Fiesta Bowl. I think they're like 8 or 9-0 in the Fiesta Bowl. And the best win, the 86 game against Miami when they intercepted 4,800 times was in the Fiesta Bowl. There's something about Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl that just, I don't know what it is. But
hey, we have to do some homework on that Boise, because didn't Boise? I forget what bowl they were in.
Yeah, Boise, some of their best moments of program. The Oklahoma game everybody thinks of, that was also the Fiesta. So
there you go.
The two kings of the Fiesta Bowl here. I apologize for the noise in the background. My cats are going berserk at the moment for some reason. But
no, that's okay.
No, and you mentioned the pressure. One other thing I want to add here before we wrap it up. You mentioned the pressure of the home teams. I'd argue, other than Ryan Day, there's probably no coach in this playoff under more pressure than James Franklin. Because for so long with Penn State and James, it's been you can't get to the playoff, can't win the big game. And the rebuttal was always that, man, if this was 12 teams, nobody would benefit more. Well, it's 12 teams, and you've got the easiest draw. I think Penn State needs to make it to at least the semifinals, or else the pressure on James Franklin is just going to only continue to crank up, especially, God forbid, they would lose to SMU at home. At least if you lose to Boise on a neutral site, that's a little bit easier to chalk up, especially, if Ashton Genty goes crazy or something. But, yeah, I think that other than Ryan Day, I don't think there's any coach in this field under more pressure than James Franklin.
Yeah, I keep forgetting about the fact that I keep saying that when they go to these next rounds that they're going at, which means that there's just no way that they're not going to change that. You can't get a bye and then not get a home game.
Yeah,
it's just silly, but they'll figure it out. I'm not saying that they're going to necessarily do it there, but they'll probably just add teams and maybe give more teams home game advantages. But whatever the case may be, that's for another year. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here. And then once again, we're going to be wrapping up the game a week from Saturday. It's an early game. Thank goodness, I guess, for that. So we should be on the air about 4:00-ish on the Penn State YouTube channel. We'll have a link in the description so you can check out where to find that. And also maybe a link so you can check out the previous post-game show that we did of the Big Ten Championship game. So you get a little taste for that. Anyway, this is the last time I'm going to talk to you before the playoffs start. So give me a prediction. Penn State, how far are they going to go?
I think they get to the semis and come up short against either Notre Dame or Georgia. Now, I will say, depending on how Gunnar Stockton looks, my pick may change. I think Oregon's winning it all. I do. But, and I talked about this on the postgame show, I wouldn't be surprised if what we saw in the Big Ten Championship game proves to be the two best teams in the country and proves to be a national championship game preview. So I think the Nittany Lions are very capable of getting to the national championship game this year. And you get into a one-game scenario, especially against a team you've already played. And as you and I have discussed before, it's hard to beat the same team twice, especially that close. I would think they'd have a shot. But if I had to make a prediction, I'd say they get to the semis and then they get tripped up by either Georgia or Notre Dame. I will also say, if you're a Penn State fan, if the season ends with them sitting here at 13-3, a trip to the Big Ten Championship game, a trip to the college football playoff semifinals, you can try and spin it however you want. That is a very successful season.
Marty, appreciate it. And I did do a little bit of a peek. Look, it's 10 days out, but 9 days out. But the coldest day in the next 9 days is Saturday, the 21st. And it is 33 degrees with snow showers early.
I think if you would ask James Franklin in that program, they would sign up for that weather.
Oh, yeah.
In a heartbeat for any home game, but especially against a team that's going to come up from Dallas, who is not going to be equipped for it, is not going to be used to it, is not going to adjust to it or be ready to adjust to it. So I will say winters around here, as I live about 60 miles west of State College, winters around here tend to go kind of roller coastery, and early this week's supposed to be warm. So usually if you get 2 or 3 warmer days, 2 or 3 colder ones are coming on the back end.
There you
so
go.
That's how it's going to play out. Like it sounds like, again, I think that works in Penn State's favor.
That's it. Wednesday, 60 degrees, and then 44, 43, 33.
Yep, that sounds about right.
There you go. That's that roller coaster you're talking about. Marty, appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it, Marty. Look forward to wrapping up the game on the 21st, and hopefully we'll have more of those games to wrap up later this year as well.
Absolutely, Greg. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good.